Brasil discute há muito tempo uma política de drogas. Discute, entre outras coisas, o fim da pena de prisão para os dependentes e a adoção de programas de tratamento e reinserção dos viciados. Esse é um avanço, mas o país ainda está longe de aderir às teses mais avançadas nesse tema. Países europeus já investem maciçamente em programas de redução de danos sofridos pelos usuários de drogas. E é este o tema do Roda Viva desta noite, que entrevista Pat O'Hare, diretor da Associação Internacional da Redução de Riscos. Ele faz um trabalho pioneiro de educação e orientação para dependentes através da troca de drogas pesadas por drogas mais leves e de cuidados que reduzem os riscos e os danos que a dependência química provoca. Para entrevistar o diretor da Associação Internacional de Redução de Danos, Pat O'Hare, convidamos Sandra Batista, psicóloga e presidente da Rede Latino-Americana de Redução de Danos, Eduardo Nunomura, editor-assistente do jornal O Estado de São Paulo, Aureliano Biancarelli, repórter do Caderno Cotidiano do jornal Folha de São Paulo, Antônio Carlos Prado, editor da revista Isto É e que realiza trabalho voluntário sobre redução de danos em presídios femininos de São Paulo, Roberta Jansen, repórter de ciência do jornal O Globo, e Arthur Guerra, psiquiatra, professor das faculdades de medicina da USP e do ABC e presidente do GREA, Grupo de Estudos de Álcool e Drogas de Medicina da USP. O Roda Viva é transmitido em rede nacional para todos os estados brasileiros e também para Brasília pela rede pública de televisão. Esta noite, o programa não permite a participação dos telespectadores porque está sendo gravado. Boa noite, Pat. Eu gostaria de começar com uma coisa que eu acho que é elementar, que é você explicar no que consistem esses programas de redução de danos. Qual é a fórmula que se adota?
The principle of harm reduction is that instead of focusing on the use of drugs, instead of trying to stop people using drugs as a primary aim, you focus on the harms that come from that drug use, and your primary aim is to reduce those harms, minimize those harms. That's not to say that you just ignore the aim of reducing the number of people who use the drugs. You do both, and in fact, the thing that we found when we first started this was that by focusing on the harms, health, people's health, crime, they would be arrested all the time. By focusing on those and dealing with those, stabilizing people's lives, people, not everybody, but some people would say, hey, I actually want to stop doing this. So we were in a position then, we had them, because we were dealing with problems that they had, and we were giving them what they want. So we were giving them methadone, for example, if they were addicted to heroin. So we had them there, and then we could engage with them, and when they said, I think I want to stop, we could refer them, we could point them in a direction. So basically, it's an acceptance of the reality of drug use in society. It's, you know, drugs have always been, are now, and always will be. Always. We'll never get rid of them. Ever since people picked a plant out of the ground and found that they got some kind of effect from it, they've done it, and always will do it. So we accept that reality. But we accept that it's not an ideal situation for many, many people, because it gives people problems. So we try to deal with the problems. Having dealt with the problems, stabilize them, then we can talk to them about stopping their use of drugs.
Mas isso não vai na contramão do raciocínio médio? Vamos usar uma comparação grosseira. Em relação aos acidentes de automóveis, aos acidentes de trânsito nas estradas e nas cidades, que matam muita gente, a política do governo, de qualquer governo, é reduzir o número de acidentes. Não tratar apenas e tão somente os acidentados para que eles sobrevivam aos acidentes ou tenham menos danos. Quer dizer, o principal objetivo, no caso do trânsito, é esse. Então, eu penso que, para a média da opinião pública, é difícil entender por que na questão da droga isso é diferente. Por que a gente não tem que atacar o cerne, o que seria o cerne do problema, que é o fato de que é errado, faz mal para a saúde, ou é proibido, ou é ilegal, ou não é aceito usar drogas.
That's a very good question. It's a very complex question, and I hope I remember the start of it when I get to the end.
Sim.
Just to take your analogy just for a minute, if we applied the current situation in lots of places, lots of countries, of prohibition, what we would do is we would ban cars. That's the analogy. We would ban people from driving. And that would be ridiculous. But what we do is, as you say, we try to reduce the number of accidents. We have controls on speed, controls on cars, you have to be a certain age to drive, all these kinds of things. So we're reducing the risk behaviour and we're reducing the harms. It's the same with harm reduction as far as drugs are concerned. Of course we want to reduce the harms, but we want to reduce the number of situations that people get in that the harms could occur. So if you give someone, for example, a clean needle to inject with every time, we're reducing the possibility of the harm occurring. We're reducing the harm, but we're also reducing the possibility. If at the same time we prescribe them a substitute, what we're doing is, especially if we prescribe them an oral substitute as opposed to injectable, we're actually reducing the number of times they inject. So we're providing them clean needles to inject with, reducing the risk of the harm of blood-borne infections. Then by providing a substance that satisfies most people's needs, we're actually reducing the number of times they will get into a risky situation. So I don't see any problem.
Muitos críticos dessa forma de redução de danos falam que a seringa é muito mais barata que a droga. Por que a pessoa iria passar a aceitar a seringa que é dada por vocês? E por que ela mesma não compraria essa seringa? Quer dizer, se ela teria dinheiro para comprar a droga, em tese ela poderia comprar a seringa. E supõe-se que hoje, pelo menos grande parte das pessoas saiba que existe um risco aí de compartilhar a seringa. Qual é a posição de vocês sobre isso?
The first point about why would they not buy, the people do. And in actual fact, in my ideal world, people who could afford to buy would buy, and they would be just available in pharmacies. In my ideal world where the situation is normalised, you wouldn't have specialist places for people to go. People would just go to shops, they'd go to pharmacies and they'd go to supermarkets and buy syringes. In Italy, for example, you can buy syringes in any supermarket. I don't know what the situation in Brazil. So, of course, people do sometimes buy them, but sometimes if the pharmacy's shut or if the syringe machine doesn't work anymore, they go to a syringe exchange and they'll get them there. So that's that particular issue. And I've forgotten the second part of your question, so you'll have to ask it again. I'm sorry.
Não, os críticos dessa forma de redução de danos, eles dizem que ela não adiantaria, ela não serviria para nada, porque, afinal de contas, a pessoa poderia simplesmente comprar a sua seringa. Ela não precisaria ter o governo ou uma ONG ou alguém fornecendo a seringa. E como é que o senhor avalia?
The critics will be wrong. Unfortunately, they will be wrong, because the reality is, and I remembered the second part of your question now, people know if I share this syringe it's going to harm me. That also is not true. And a lot of people, I mean now more people do know, but there's still people prepared to take the risk. Because it's not said that every single injection is going to transmit a virus. People are prepared to take this risk. But what we do know is that drug users, once they're given the means and the opportunity to change their behaviour, i.e. to use clean needles and syringes and not to share, they take that. Because they don't want to die. They don't want to get hepatitis, they don't want to get HIV and get AIDS. They don't want, drug users actually, given the opportunity, respond just the same as anyone else. Because that's what they are, just the same as anyone else.
Eduardo.
Como tem sido a relação dos programas de redução de dano com a Igreja Católica? Vale lembrar que o Vaticano condena a prevenção da AIDS via preservativo. Assim, se vocês encontram alguma objeção parecida com outros grupos religiosos de uma maneira geral?
in my experience, in the countries that I know best, and I live in Italy, I live in Rome, I live very close to the Vatican actually. In my experience, politicians and policymakers don't actually pay very much attention to this. The impact of this kind of thing, where the Catholic Church recently said that using a condom spreads HIV because the virus leaks out. This is what they actually said, it leaks out. Now, that kind of thing, the problem there is not policymakers, because no policymaker is going to swallow that. It's the general public. That's where the damage is done on public opinion, because in a lot of countries, my country, I'm Irish, and in my country, the Catholic faith is a very simple faith, and people tend to believe what they're told by priests, certainly by the Pope. And so that would set doubt in people's minds about condoms, and you just never know. That behavior may change because people may think, oh, I can't use, even if they, for a few days, they stop using a condom, for example, and then maybe pick it up again. There's a period there in which they take a risk. Now, maybe I'm overstating the case here, you know, I don't know. But recently in Holland or Belgium, I can't remember which, the senior Catholic priest, the cardinal, said that if, in order to avoid HIV, AIDS, people should use condoms for sex. He actually said this. So there is a sensible side to the Catholic Church as well. But I don't think, in Italy, I think it probably has been important, but not now. Not now. I don't think so.
Por favor. Há uma série de conceitos, né, que cercam o conceito maior de redução de danos, e a própria mídia, quando aborda esse assunto, geralmente ela aborda de uma forma também só conceitual. Eu queria descer um pouco mais a parte química disso, a parte médica, entre aspas, ou sem aspas, que é o seguinte: sempre que se dá exemplo de substituição, de redução, isso faz muito tempo, é a metadona e heroína, certo? Hoje, em quadro de alcoolismo, né, se trabalha, mas não é uma característica da redução de danos. É mundialmente aceito alguns benzodiazepínicos, sobretudo o diazepam. Eu quero saber o seguinte: quais são outros exemplos concretos, químicos, né, que existem de substituição de drogas e alguns números disso?
My weak spot is my memory for research. I'm not a researcher, and so figures, I don't, you know, they don't come readily to me. But examples, a bad example is diazepam for alcohol use. That's a bad example in my opinion. Not a bad example. I don't mean that your example is bad, but it's bad practice as far as I'm concerned to prescribe people diazepam. I mean, I think, you know, long-term prescription of diazepam is problematic. I'm not a doctor, incidentally, so, you know, this is a layperson's opinion. But, I mean, I suppose the purest form of substitution is to substitute pharmaceutically pure heroin for street heroin. And this is done in some countries. It was done in the UK since probably 1927, 28, 29, round about the Rolleston report. Heroin was prescribed. In Holland, in Switzerland, in Germany, in Canada, and other countries, there are trials now with the prescription of heroin. And it's very successful.
Qual a vantagem?
Mas eu gostaria de saber de outras substâncias que, por exemplo, mesmo, né, a substituição da cocaína em forma de crack por THC não é uma coisa que ainda cientificamente esteja comprovado que funciona, certo? E esse exemplo da metadona, ele é clássico, né? Até pelas dores, se eu estiver errado aqui, o doutor Arthur Guerra me corrige, né? Pelas dores físicas, musculares causadas pela heroína. O que nunca surge de novidade na redução de danos é uma parte mais química mesmo. Então, assim, com o que se pode entrar, tá, quimicamente, né, no indivíduo para reduzir o dano, certo?
Você está falando
de
da
alguma
cocaína
droga
ou da maconha?
Não, eu estou falando da dependência em geral, certo? Ou seja, o que quimicamente pode agir em todos os neurotransmissores, diminuindo, né, o dano do uso da droga. Fora a metadona, que é o exemplo que sempre se dá, e eu acho que a redução de danos ela parou um pouco aí. Não se discute outros aspectos.
Mas eu acho que com relação à cocaína,
So,
o
are you
professor pode
talking
falar, mas eu acho que não há nada, pelo momento, a não ser essa experiência com a maconha, não há nada de novo.
Mas que não teve nem comprovação científica. Assim, a própria Escola Paulista de Medicina, antiga Escola Paulista, né, hoje federal, ela coloca muito claro que ela não valida aquela experiência dado o tamanho do grupo.
Say something here? If Louis Pasteur had waited for clinical trials of penicillin, we wouldn't have penicillin. Why do we have to wait? This is public health we're talking about now. Why do we have to wait until there's absolute proof that these things work? There are good results from this study in Sao Paulo with marijuana for cocaine, for crack and cocaine. Good results. It's not proven. But why how do we prove? This is one of the big problems with the fact that a lot of these drugs are illegal. We can't do trials. We can't. Ecstasy, for example, we can't do trials on it because it's illegal. You know, we'll never find out.
Justamente, os testes, os ensaios são feitos em universidades. Se a droga é proibida e a universidade é um órgão do Estado, logo você não tem como trabalhar essa experiência. É o que vem acontecendo no Brasil. Não há investimentos, entre aspas, nessa questão
típica
de uma
do crack com a
substituição.
substituição pelo... Existe um trabalho muito forte de estudo na Bolívia de substituição de uso de cocaína pela folha mascada. Esse é um trabalho que tem sido desenvolvido junto à Universidade da Bolívia e um grupo de psiquiatras junto à Escola de Psiquiatria Boliviana. Mas também, como disse o Pet, em andamento.
Muito bem. Yes, that's the position here. It's in some parts of the world. That's not the position in the USA. Actually, there are people who've done trials on MDMA and lots of those types of drugs and can get them, can buy them from the States. In Brazil, it's the same. I understand that. Your question, however, about cocaine particularly is a very good question. Because I think that is our Achilles heel at this point, actually. I think we fairly well know now how to deal with heroin. And we know how to deal with the risks involved in the use of heroin as far as blood-borne infections are concerned. But we're weak on cocaine, to be frank, and you're quite right. This thing in Sao Paulo with marijuana, it's a small-scale project. The project Sandra's talking about is a small-scale project. I think we have to just keep on doing these trials, keep on coming up with ideas. The big problem is that although with opiates, with heroin, people seem to accept that you can substitute. With stimulant drugs, for some reason, they're more demonized than heroin almost, actually. Cocaine and crack. They're demon drugs now, you know. Heroin is passé. Heroin is like, it's an aging population in Europe and let them, okay, we'll just put them on methadone and let them just age out of this. Cocaine and crack, they're bad news, according to politicians and everyone, and a lot of people who use them. So the political will to make that big step and say, okay, look, we think that if we prescribe marijuana, we can reduce crack use. We think. There's a trial going on, and the results seem to be encouraging. There's no political will to say, go ahead and do it. That's one of the problems, to widen this study. In the UK, for example, for many, many years now, they've been prescribing methamphetamine for amphetamine users. Pharmaceutical methamphetamine, with really good results. This has been going for 20 years. But it hasn't really spread. It's in one small part of the country. Once again, it's the accusation that you're giving people their drug and all you're doing is you're keeping them dependent. You can deal with it with heroin, but it's difficult to deal with crack because of all the scene around crack, all of the sex that goes on, all the violence, this kind of thing. So it's lack of political will, but I also think probably on our part, it's lack of an ability to think through this one and advocate properly for it. Actually, I think we don't as a movement, we don't argue very well for this kind of approach to cocaine. And we kind of, in Europe, it's becoming a big deal, but I don't think it's the same as it is here and has been in other parts of Latin America. It's not our strongest point, but that doesn't mean to say we're not thinking about it and we're not trying to do things, because we are.
Muito bem. Muito prazer em conhecê-lo. Bem-vindo ao Brasil, Mr. Pratt.
Thank you.
O Brasil, como outros países de contrastes, tem um cenário bem definido em relação às drogas. O consumo de drogas tem aumentado, ano a ano. E esse consumo aumenta em todas as populações, mas também em adolescentes e atualmente em crianças. Como é que o senhor entende redução de danos que não prega a abstinência para essa população carente, crianças de 11, 12, 13 anos?
Yeah. Abstinence is probably the desirable state. I don't think there's any doubt about that most people would be better and have a better life if they didn't use drugs. Our position is that it's difficult to attain this state with a lot of people. It's difficult to get there. And while we're trying to get there, spending a lot of time and effort getting there, there's an awful